Great. First, I'd like to thank our founder and chairman, Dr. Mohammed Majid. Doc, thank you for having me up here. Thank you for putting up with me. And Rajesh, Ranjit, thank you also for giving me this moment. So what I'm here to talk to you today about is this word up here, fructose. And notice the title, Facts, Fallacies, and Folklore about the first friend of fat. Now, this has really become a major, major evil, and the word is getting out. It's getting out even within very mainstream medicine. Now, if you look here, even one of the, this is just a couple of months ago in Harvard Health publications, too much fructose, a hazard to heart health. And let's just skip down here. Basically, all this is a fancy way of saying it makes your insides fat and it makes your outsides fat. And it makes your liver look really bad. So, fact number one. Now, this is a U.S. statistic, so bear with me on this, but I'm building to make a case. From the mid-1990s to 2007, the average per person consumption of high fructose corn syrup was 40 grams a day. Now, that is high fructose corn syrup, and we're talking about both fructose and high fructose corn syrup. In 1970, it was less than half a gram. That's amazing. That's what, 40 years? And there's a reason, and we're going to get into that. The graph will, a couple graphs later, we'll show that. A couple slides later, excuse me. So here's the basic structure of our not-so-friendly fructose. It's a simple sugar. It's a monosaccharide, like glucose, and it's one of the three major monosaccharides that occur in nature. However, not in the quantities that the West is consuming. There's nothing natural about having a 40-ounce big gulp with 60 grams of fructose in it, or as high fructose corn syrup. It's still 6 carbons, 12 oxygens, and 6 hydrogens, just like glucose, but it's the arrangement, which we're going to get to. It's an arrangement of those molecules, of those atoms, I should say. Now, this is what I like to call the bitter truth index. It did say bittersweet, but I thought I'd take the sweet out. You'll notice that fructose is actually right around 73 to 75% more or sweeter than any other form of sugar, including the one right above it, which is table sugar, which has the rating of 100, kind of the gold standard that everything's measured by, because that's the principal sugar on people's coffee tables and breakfast nooks. So fallacy. Fructose is better for you than sucrose, table sugar. Absolutely, positively not. Gram for gram, no way. So here's a little basic chemistry. Now you'll note glucose. Now glucose is a monosaccharide. Now if you hear the word saccharide, it's always a carbohydrate. It's not a protein, it's not a fat, it's always a carbohydrate. And the shorter the carbohydrate, the quicker it gets in your bloodstream. And the end result will always be glucose. It's only glucose that is metabolized in any living organism for energy, or as energy. And that is done principally by insulin. So muscle tissue, et cetera, glucose is broken down, it's metabolized by the hormone insulin, which is produced by the pancreas. Now, on the right, you'll see the structure of fructose. Still 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, and 6 oxygens, but you'll note that it's arranged a little differently. Now, table sugar is both molecules attached together, glycosidic linkage. But if you note up here, what makes the two different is, like I said earlier, glucose is metabolized by insulin. Fructose is the only sugar that has to be forced through the liver. There's no other way. It can't be metabolized in the muscle tissues by a runner or an athlete. It has to be pushed through the liver, and it just chokes the liver, stresses the liver. So, fructose is folklore. Fructose is good for you because it's made from fruit. We hear that F-R-U, it's from fruit. Absolutely wrong. 110%, absolutely wrong. Do you know where most fructose comes from? Genetically modified corn, about 99.998%, literally. Definitely corn, and about 60% in the West is coming from genetically modified corn, and that is on the constant rise. Fructose fact: where fructose naturally occurs, fiber does also. Okay, think about that. So you're eating a fruit. Yes, it was discovered from fruit. That's how it got its name. But that is not how it is commercially produced. Okay? So when you're eating a piece of fruit, pick any fruit you want, you're getting naturally occurring glucose in there, you're getting naturally occurring fructose, you're getting maltose, you're getting a bunch of different sugars and a bunch of different disaccharides and trisaccharides that all give it some sweetness and different levels of sweetness. So in nature, believe it or not, there's fructose in onions, there's fructose in all these potatoes, all of these different fruits and vegetables, there's fructose in. Now here's something that's really interesting. See that pineapple up in the upper left-hand corner? That entire pineapple has less than a can of Coke of fructose. How many of you sit down and eat an entire pineapple? You don't. You get full before you can complete the mission, right? See, fiber is a built-in, inborn mechanism that limits your consumption of fructose. Okay? So you sit down, the average apple is going to have 5 grams of fructose. Sit down and try to eat the equivalent from apples as you're getting in a can of Coke. You're not going to do it. You're going to feel so bloated, you're going to give up by the third apple. So, fructose. Now, we're going to talk about high fructose corn syrup. As I like to call it, the worst of both worlds. Now, I'll tell you why it's the worst of both worlds. Fructose, high fructose corn syrup is a mixture suspended in water as a liquid, as a syrup. And again, it is a direct production of corn. But it gives you, there's 3 different grades of high fructose corn syrup, 42%, 55, and 90. Okay? So that reflects the percentages of fructose concentration. The remainder is glucose. But here's why it's the worst of both worlds. Because fructose, if you notice in red, because of the presence of glucose and fructose, your blood sugar goes up, but fructose blocks insulin. It creates insulin resistance. So the fructose portion is blocking insulin. It's blocking insulin from doing its job, not on fructose, because that can't be done. It's blocking insulin's job on glucose. Okay, so you're getting, in that high fructose corn syrup, you're getting glucose, so your blood sugar is going up, and then it's the molecule, the other sugar that occurs with it, is inhibiting its ability to be metabolized properly. And on top of it, it's frying your liver to boot. So that is just a horrid combination. Now, back on that Harvard Health newsletter, my second slide, it said that the average consumption 100 years ago was 15 grams of fructose daily. Not high fructose corn syrup, but fructose. And that was actually very seasonal. Also depends where you lived. If you lived up in Wisconsin or if you lived, in the more southern states. Depends as what is available to you. Okay, so the same thing goes here. Are you north or you're south? etc. What fruits and what vegetables are available was really dictating how much fructose you'd get. Sometimes it was 5 grams a day, sometimes it was 15. But that being said, high fructose corn syrup, in its the most synthetic way it occurs, I can't say naturally occurs, but it's so synthetic that here it's giving you, again, the worst of two worlds, glucose and fructose. So when you add these two together and you're consuming it daily in high quantities, here's what you get: a rise in blood sugar, high blood insulin, because fructose is blocking and glucose demands its metabolism, so the pancreas is pushing it out. Rise in insulin resistance, specifically due to fructose. Rise in free fatty acids, that's because it has to be metabolized through the liver. And a rise in hunger, which I'm going to get to in a couple of minutes. But it actually blocks satiety, okay? And it actually has a very hard and harsh addictive mechanism to it. So, next slide. Fact. Where synthetic fructose occurs, fiber is generally never present. So I'm going to challenge you on this. If any of you can think of one example, please educate me. So, lots of fructose, but where's the fiber? Breakfast cereals use both high fructose corn syrup as well as crystalline fructose. And one misnomer is high fructose corn syrup is always wet. It's not necessarily true. More sources of fructose, but I still don't see any fiber. You know? Anybody help me out here? I don't see it. And this one really got me. I was actually doing some research on this one last night. Now, all of these items appear, and it is in Miracle Whip, which is America's #1 substitute for truly natural mayonnaise. But the prunes threw me. And I looked that up. I looked up this exact brand. 1 serving, 4 grams of fiber and 24 grams of, you got it, you know the word, fructose. That's horrid. And needless to say, our #1 obesity culprit in the world, soft drinks. There's no fiber in that. It's just sugar and the worst form. So fructose and high fructose corn syrup, clinically established health risks. Now what I mean by that is every bullet point on that chart has at least 10 published clinical studies. Okay, so we can run through it real quick. I'll go over here since I've been favoring it over there. So, increased body fat, weight gain, obesity, elevated blood sugar, and on and on. But there's some in the right-hand column that people often don't associate with fructose, as I like to call it, fructose toxicity. And that is systemic inflammation. You get up in the morning, you got a little bit more aches and pains going on. Well, believe it or not, fructose is contributing to that. Hypertension. There are numerous articles, clinical studies on human beings, we're not talking lab rats, that show fructose consumption raises blood pressure. Both as high fructose corn syrup and fructose. Because it doesn't matter if it's fructose, it has to be pushed through the liver. Gout, something that a lot of people don't associate with fructose. Cataract formation, interesting study on this. Person it doesn't even have to be diabetic. And the rate of cataract production accelerates dramatically if fructose is consumed daily. Atherosclerosis, hardening of the arteries, and the last one, dental caries, tooth decay, cavities. So, in 2 words, you can call all of this metabolic syndrome. Now, I'm going to go back 2 slides. On the left column, by definition, if you have 3 or more of those, you qualify as having metabolic syndrome, with an emphasis of having excessive visceral fat, okay, and carrying your weight all in the waistline. So, metabolic syndrome. Let's visit that for a minute from a clinical perspective. So this here, I'm pretty blind, so I got to get close. Journal of Clinical Investigation. I hope you guys can read the bottom line. And the DNL stands for de novo lipogenesis. So that's forced liver-based lipo, meaning fat, genesis, the beginning of the production. It forces, fructose forces your liver to produce more fat. This other study here, fructose consumption, potential mechanisms for its effect to increase visceral adiposity. Adiposity is a fancy way of saying this, body fat. And induce dyslipidemia, so your blood fats are out of whack, and insulin resistance. Another one, consumption of high fructose corn syrup in beverages may play a role in the epidemic of obesity. It's real interesting also what they say down here. They're isolating, just like it says in the title, high fructose corn syrup. Now, look at this graph, obesity and high fructose corn syrup. Now, note that this is starting right at 1976, and the next graph will show you something that goes back to what we had discussed earlier, that magical year 1970. So you can see as fructose has been on the rise per capita, so has obesity. Now this is where it gets interesting. The yellow represents cane sugar, the good old-fashioned stuff Grandma kept on her table, you know, when you were over there. Good old-fashioned table sugar was the yellow graph. Or the yellow line, I should say. High fructose corn syrup is the green. Now, you'll note that cane sugar started going down right around 1970. Why? Because that's when fructose was introduced in commercial quantity. And it's been downhill ever since, shall we say. So you'll note that as cane sugar has gone down, being from sugar cane, and you can also throw beet sugar into that group as well, but sucrose. Fructose is just a cheaper alternative. And thus you'll see that the obesity rate has gone up. Fallacy. Fructose is a sugar of choice because it has a low glycemic index. Without me flipping back on the slides, sucrose, which is the gold standard, that has a glycemic index of 100. Fructose has a glycemic index of 17. That's another reason why it became so popular. The dietitians and the cardiologists in the 80s were saying, hey, this stuff doesn't get your blood sugar up very, very quickly. Let's use that. Let's use fructose. But they were never looking at liver markers. They were never looking at cholesterol levels, triglyceride levels, et cetera, liver enzymes. And this stuff doesn't happen overnight. You have to be consuming it daily. It's nothing that'll happen inside of a 6-week trial, per se, unless you're really forcing a lot down your throat. So, yes, it has a low glycemic index, and also the tests were just testing fructose. And then this other group was just taking sucrose, and another group was just taking glucose. But here's where that experiment is completely wrong. When you're consuming fructose, you're generally getting it with other carbohydrates. And remember, it blocks insulin. So the other carbohydrates that you're getting make your blood sugar go through the roof. So if you're in a perfect world, if you're only eating pure fructose and pure glucose, yes, the glucose is going to get your blood sugar up quicker. But that's not the way It works. You know, we're getting other carbohydrates in our meal, and if there's fructose in there, then it blocks its absorption, and your blood sugar goes through the roof. So that's what's known as glycemic load. So it has a low glycemic index, but a very high glycemic load because it impacts the metabolism of the other carbohydrates. Now, this was out of the Times of India, although this is regarding a study done in the U.S., but this was in the Times of India just about 2 months ago. And they're talking about an experiment where it was an animal model. They used mice. And all they did was they gave them equal amounts of glucose and fructose. Not sucrose, but glucose. Because if they used if they used sucrose, you'd be getting 50% fructose. So they used glucose and fructose, and they gave it to mice. And look what happened. Guess which mouse, this is called mousabolic syndrome, by the way. Guess what mouse was consuming the fructose? The one on the left. Same amount, same concentration, but that's what fructose will do to you. And here's some more clinical evidence to back it up. Fructose, a key factor in the development of metabolic syndrome and hypertension. Again, obesity, diabetes, kidney disease, gout. Dietary fructose and metabolic syndrome. Hypertension, another one. Roles of fructose concentration on cataract formation, which I had mentioned to you earlier. So to summarize, I think this is the very best way to put it. No fructose. And I'm going to throw this in. I might be going a little long, but I think it's important. In 2011, in the United States, and luckily the rest of the world is starting to follow this, fructose consumption is finally starting to go down. And there's 2 reasons for that. Kudos to former Mayor Bloomberg of New York City. He had a lot to do with it because he had the guts to put a ban on large size soft drink sales. And in the millennials, because of their access to the internet and that being their culture, they're getting the word out as well. So things are changing. So amen to that. So I say thank you for your time and your attention, and I hope you all leave as experts on sugar from here on out. So thank you.